All right. So first off, thanks so much for taking the time to join me here. Uh, First question that I had for you is tell me a little bit about yourself and just kind of the work that you do in the community. How you
Yeah.
started. Yeah.
Okay. So, how I got started and the work
Uh-huh.
that I'm doing currently. So, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for reaching out. This is a cool opportunity to get to talk about my work. So, how I got started is sort of a long and roundabout story. I've always loved being around kids, working with kids, playing with kids. I did not grow up thinking that I was going to do anything in the field of working with children. I thought I was going to be a musical theater actor and moved to New York. And then when I sort of got a little taste of the reality of that, I was like, oh, yeah, I don't think so. This isn't working for me. So I kind of went back to the drawing board of what else do I like? What else is out there? And I was really interested in nutrition. I was working with some nutritionists at the time. I had just graduated college and was working as an administrative assistant. And some of the dietitians I worked with were like, there's really a need for people to work with people with eating disorders. And that was really interesting to me and have some personal experience with that. And I was like, that sounds interesting. So I started going to conferences about, eating disorders. And as I was sitting and listening to people talk, I started thinking, I'm not so interested in sitting with people and planning menus. I'm really more interested to hear about their lives. I'm more curious about what's going on, what the kind of influences that led to this person being where they are. And I was like, maybe I want to be a social worker. And so I went back to school got my master's in social work, and throughout my internships there, those were both working with young kids. And then I started from there. And so for the last 2.5 years, I've been working with a private practice called Arbit Counseling. And we have an office in DC and an office in Maryland. And we, as a group, do a wide range, right? Work with a wide range of people. And my work really focuses on early childhood. So I do a lot of play therapy and a lot of parent coaching. And in addition to like more community kind of stuff, like doing workshops and stuff like that out in the community.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, that was my next question actually. Like tell me a little bit about the work that you do in your current role. Yeah,
Yeah, like you want to hear a little more about that?
yeah.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I feel like I could talk forever about that. So let's see. So, like I said, I'm in a private practice setting, which has its own um, sorts of things that we think about as clinicians in a private practice setting. We think a lot about access to care and who is able to afford, our services and who isn't. And so that's a piece of things that maybe I can get into. But I'd say the majority of my work is working with kids up to about 11 or 12, usually like the end of elementary age is usually when it's time for them to kind of move on to something else, different approach. So 11 and younger. My approach is really based in child-centered play therapy, which is all about, it's very relational. And so based in attachment theory and really working to in a very experiential way to give kids the experience of feeling like, what it feels like to be in charge, what it feels like to have space to kind of try out different things that maybe are not okay at school, not okay at home, but in here we can practice that, we can try that out, and really feel empowered, and regulate. And then, so the other kind of major influence for me is a model called synergetic play therapy, which comes out of Colorado. And that model has a lot of the child centered philosophy also. But what it brings in that I really love is the focus on the nervous system and working on kind of rewiring the nervous system of the kid that you're working with. And so that is yeah, that's a little bit about the work that I do. And then I also do quite a bit of working with parents. I'm not a provider. My experience is really very family centered, and so I just include parents in part of the process. And parents are going to be doing their own parallel work in reflecting on, what things have been like at home. How can we understand what their child's behavior is trying to communicate to them? How can they reflect on their own childhoods and how the things that happen then are showing up now in their parenting. And then, as far as the community piece, my practice partners with a local family shelter. And so, every so often, we'll go and do workshops for them. And when I facilitate workshops, they're usually related to early childhood development or one, I think the last one I did was like on a growth mindset, um, stress management, things like that. And that's one of the ways that we are trying to work to support, access.
Mm-hmm. So like you mentioned two types of therapy that you primarily use. Like how are those kind of different and how do those kind of overlap?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So child-centered play therapy is there's like 8 foundational principles, right? And most of them have to do with the way the therapist engages with kids, right? It's about like establishing an atmosphere of permissiveness, which I was sort of talking about before, right? Kids come in and we like have toy guns in here, right? And sometimes kids are not allowed to play with guns elsewhere. And so they'll be like hesitant. And, you're sort of like, yeah, it's okay to do that here, right? It's okay to get really angry. It's okay to dump toys out. It's okay to, right? Lots of things are okay to do here that are not okay in other places, because then we can get really curious about why you're feeling like you want and need to do that, and what the feelings are underneath and how we can regulate those. So things like that, right? The unconditional positive regard, the attitude of permissiveness. I can't remember all 8 off the top of my head, right? But there are these principles of child-centered play therapy that are very much based in how the therapist approaches the child. um, Synergetic play therapy is also very based in the clinician's um, presentation, I guess, or like the clinician thinking about like, yourself in the room with the therapist. So that's one place they beautifully overlap. Um, Synergetic play therapy is pretty open, actually. It can combine with a lot of different types of different therapies. Like sometimes I'm sort of still very much learning, but really interested in internal family systems and like working with parts with kids. That blends really nicely with synergetic play therapy. So for synergetic play therapy, I would say that the sort of really foundational tenet is this idea that kids will come into the room and they will play, or they will not play, right? Or they will talk, or they will move, or they'll do whatever they do, right? They'll come and just kind of sit on the couch and like not want to talk to you, right? They'll do whatever they're going to do. And everything that they do is very intentionally communicating what it feels like to be them, right? So when a kid comes in and sits down and is like, I don't want to be here. Whoa, okay, I get a feeling, like I get an experience of that of, oh man, okay. And then I have the opportunity to use my coping strategies, right? To take a big breath and to sort of, right? You see me, it's like so automatic for me. I do a lot of this, like touching my heart, right? Touching my proprioceptive, sense. And immediately I'm using coping strategies to manage the feeling that the child is communicating to me. So right away, right? There's learning, there's like potential learning happening. And I'm communicating that like, you can feel like that in here. And I'm not going to try to change you. I'm not going to say, well, here's why you should want to be here, or we're going to have fun, or we're right. I'm not trying to change their mind or talk them out of it. I'm just like, yeah, okay. Oof, you don't want to be here. Ooh, when you say that, I feel like this pit feeling in my stomach,
Yeah.
right? Which gives the kid a chance to check in with what's happening in my body and really develop that capacity for self-awareness and self-trust and all the, foundations of emotion regulation. So I feel like I kind of got a little bit off topic. Well, that's a little bit about those two models that I use the most. You were asking how they overlap. I talked a little bit about how they overlap. And where they're different, I guess, is synergetic play therapy. You're going to be naming more of your own experience. In child-centered play therapy, you really would just be following along with what the child is doing. Um, and then I do also, right, sometimes integrate more directive play therapy approaches. And that would be where I would say, I was wondering if maybe today we whatever read this book or did this art project, or right, like, or even in the middle of a session, right, when a kid is bringing something up and I sort of get an idea and I'll pull out a piece of paper and start drawing a picture of what they're talking about and be like, is this right? That's not um that isn't like that isn't child centered, right? That's me as the clinician taking some direction. So I would say my approach is pretty integrative, and I think most of the people I know also work in some level of integration.
Yeah. Um, my next question is, what impact does doing this kind of work have not just on yourself? In other words, what have you learned? What are you aiming to learn like what have you learned in your doing this kind of work, and what do you hope to learn or gain as you progress in your role?
Oh my gosh, Laszlo, that is such a fantastic question. And it really does get at the heart of, particularly for synergetic play therapy, which I've been talking about. I mean, they talk so much about your own journey, personal journey, and how that impacts, right? You have to kind of be willing to take this journey yourself, in order to learn and grow in your work also. So, what have I learned? I have grown. I've grown into some of my more uncomfortable, edges. So, I'll give an example. For me, I tend to be it's pretty natural for me to follow the child's lead. I think that's a place where I'm really strong. A place where I have more challenges is setting boundaries and setting limits when they need to be set, which is important. That's a really important part of the work. And for a long time, and probably even still, sometimes I will sort of get this feeling of like, oh, I think some kind of boundary needs to be set, particularly around sensory play. Kids are playing with sand and Play-Doh and water and right, all this kind of messy play. And I'm like, okay, I think maybe there needs to be some limit here. And I override it, right? And I'm like, no, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. They need to, right? And I have learned so much and gotten so much better at like using my own, okay, this is uncomfortable for me. It's okay. Right. And like taking that breath for myself and
Yeah.
saying, okay, you know, I see that we need the sand to be a big mess. Let's pull out this, we have like a folded up shower curtain under the couch. Let's pull out the shower curtain. Let's pull out the mat. I need you to just call it the mat and put it on the floor, and we can dump the sand on the floor and play with the sand on the mat. Right. So that we can easily clean it up and we can save the sand and it's not a big mess all over the place. So that's an area where I have felt, particularly these last 2.5 years in private practice, I've grown a lot. And where I feel like there's more for me there to continue to grow. On a more practical level, I feel like there's so many different areas to learn about and sort of topics and different research areas to learn about. So like I've been really interested in, medical trauma and how we can support that, right? Kids who have had like invasive medical procedures, and how can we support their nervous systems, right? to kind of release the stuck survival stress that comes along with that. Around neurodiversity, right? How can we be neurodiversity affirming in our practice, right? How can I be neurodiversity affirming in my practice? I'm learning so much about that, and about some of the kind of mistakes that I've made in the past, right? With trying to kind of push neurodiverse kids to be more that look more neurotypical, and that's like not right. That's not actually very helpful. So actually is harmful. So learning much more about that. And what else? I don't know, there's just so many different different kind of divorce, working with children of divorce. That's, really tough. And I feel like there's just always more to learn about how I can understand the experience of kids and help communicate that with their parents. Um, yeah, so I guess those are like kind of personally and professionally, but then also more like sort of maybe academically, professionally areas where I'm interested to grow.
Uh-huh. So to kind of wrap this up, like what can people take away from this conversation? How can this type of work, um, let me rephrase that. How can, this type of work, um, help individuals, people understand, mental health? Because oftentimes mental health gets stigmatized, and so that can be a problem.
Yes. Oh, I love this question. So, two things immediately sort of come to my mind. Number one is that it is never too young to seek support. Like your child is never too young. There's no minimum age that kids need to be, right? To get support. I work with infants and parents together in the right, like infant parent dyads. So like babies, right? Like you're really are never too young. And I've heard from many parents that I've met whose kids are maybe 2.5, 3. They're like, oh, we had concerns a year ago, but we mentioned it to our pediatrician, and our pediatrician said, well, he's too young, he'll grow out of it, right? And parents often feel dismissed by that, right? They feel like, well, but I also kind of know that something doesn't feel right. And so telling me he'll grow out of it is meant to be reassuring, but it actually makes me feel like you're not getting it or you're not hearing me. Um, and so what I tell parents is maybe that is the case. Maybe they will get older and sort of mature and their brain will grow in all these wonderful ways. And there are also ways that we can help you get through it and cope until that does happen, right? So kids are never too young is number one. And number two, which I think maybe speaks more to your direct question around stigma of mental health challenges and understanding mental health challenges, is that kids, I think of Ross Green. He says kids do well if they can, right? And so if kids are having really a difficult time, if they are shutting down and, not like sort of withdrawing, if they are having meltdowns, if they are, oppositional and have trouble like moving through adult sort of routines that adults want them to move through, there are really good reasons for that. Most often, I think they're relationally related, and so it's hard to see. But there are good reasons. You do not have a bad kid, and you are not a bad parent. There are reasons for it. So, and there are people who want to help figure that out with you and walk that journey with you and help things feel better.
Mm-hmm. All right.